subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin this one. Bernard Houston's hands didn't shake anymore. 16 years as a SEAL Team 6 close-quarters combat trainer had burned the tremors out of him, replaced them with something colder. But watching his 8-year-old daughter Gabriella through the kitchen window of his ex-wife's house, seeing her small shoulders hunch as Donnie Hoover's voice carried through the walls, Bernard felt something ancient stir in his chest. He'd parked 3 houses down. The custody agreement said alternate weekends, but this wasn't his weekend. This was surveillance. Gabriella had started making excuses, stomach aches, headaches, anything to avoid going back to her mother's place. Last week, she'd flinched when he raised his hand to fix her hair. Through the window, he watched Donnie grab a beer from the fridge. The man was broad-shouldered but soft, the kind of physique built in a gym and destroyed in bars. Debbie, Bernard's ex-wife, sat at the table with her back to the window, her posture defeated. She'd remarried 6 months ago. 6 months of Bernard watching his daughter disappear into herself. Bernard's phone buzzed. A text from his buddy, Kirk Austin, who still worked contracts. "You watching that house again? Not healthy, brother." Bernard pocketed the phone without answering. Kirk didn't understand. Kirk's kids were grown, safe. Kirk had spent 16 years teaching men how to kill efficiently only to feel powerless watching his daughter suffer. Inside, Donnie slammed his beer down. Gabriella jumped. Bernard's jaw clenched. He'd run Donnie through every database he could access through old military contacts. Donnie Hoover was a small-time construction foreman, 2 DUIs, 1 domestic disturbance call from his first marriage that went nowhere. His brother Gary was the real problem. Police Chief Gary Hoover, 23 years on the force, connections that ran deep through the county. Bernard had made inquiries, carefully. Too carefully. Gary had eyes everywhere. The question wasn't whether Donnie was hurting Gabriella. Bernard could see it in the way she moved, the new carefulness in her gestures. The question was how to prove it without Gary burying the evidence. Bernard started his truck and drove to the warehouse district where he'd been renting a space for the past month. The building was anonymous, one of hundreds of identical structures. Inside, he'd set up a training room, heavy bag, mats, weapons locked in a safe. Old habits. But lately, he'd been using it for something else. The back wall was covered in photographs, documents, surveillance notes. Donnie's routines, Gary's schedule, Debbie's movements, the bartender at Rusty's Tavern where Donnie spent Thursday nights, the dispatcher at the police station who owed Gary favors, the judge who'd presided over Bernard's divorce, the one who'd given Debbie primary custody because Bernard's lifestyle and career made him unsuitable for domestic stability. Judge Matthew Humphrey, another name on the wall. Bernard had learned patience in the service. He'd waited 3 days in the Hindu Kush for a single shot. He could wait now, but Gabriella couldn't. His phone rang. Debbie's number. Bernard. Her voice was tight. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "Donnie says you've been driving by the house. You need to stop. You're scaring Gabby." Bernard counted to 3. "Gabby has bruises on her arms. She flinched last weekend when I went to hug her." Silence. "Then she's clumsy. She falls." "Debbie, you don't get to do this, Bernard. You don't get to play the concerned father after you spent 16 years choosing the Navy over your family." Judge Humphrey was right. "You're not stable. If you keep harassing us, Gary will file a restraining order." The line went dead. Bernard set the phone down carefully. Gary. Of course Gary knew. Which meant Gary was protecting Donnie. Which meant Bernard was running out of time. He pulled up the surveillance footage from the micro camera he'd placed in Gabriella's backpack. Technically illegal, technically inadmissible in court, but he wasn't planning on going to court. The footage from yesterday showed Donnie grabbing Gabriella's arm hard enough to leave marks, shoving her toward her room. Debbie standing in the doorway, watching, doing nothing. Bernard made 3 calls. First to Kirk Austin, asking him to pull everything on Gary Hoover's career. Complaints, settlements, anything buried. Second to an old teammate, Timothy Henson, who ran a private security firm and owed Bernard his life from Kandahar. Third to his lawyer, a sharp woman named Judith Montgomery, who'd handled his divorce and knew how dirty Gary played. "I need options," Bernard told Judith. Legal ones, if possible. With Gary Hoover involved? Judith laughed bitterly. Bernard, I've had 3 cases against his department. Every witness suddenly gets amnesia. Every piece of evidence goes missing. He owns half the county. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, don't. You'll lose Gabriella completely. I'm already losing her. Then gather evidence. Real evidence. I'll file for emergency custody, but we need something concrete. Hospital records, teacher statements, something Gary can't bury. Bernard thought about the footage on his laptop. Donnie's hand wrapped around his daughter's arm. What if I have video? How'd you get it? He told her. She swore. That's inadmissible. Fruit of the poisonous tree. Use it and Gary will have you arrested for stalking, wiretapping, harassment. He'll make you look like the threat. Bernard had known that, but he needed to hear it. Then I wait for something worse to happen. Bernard, thanks for the advice, Judith. He hung up and stared at the wall of evidence. 16 years teaching men to kill, and he couldn't protect his own daughter through legal channels. The irony wasn't lost on him. The call came on a Tuesday. Bernard was running a private security consultation for a tech company, teaching their executive protection team proper room clearing techniques. His phone vibrated in his pocket, unknown number, and he almost ignored it. But the third vibration made him step out. Mr. Houston? A woman's voice, clinical. This is County General Hospital. Your daughter Gabriella was brought in by ambulance 40 minutes ago. You're listed as her emergency contact. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. What happened? I can't discuss details over the phone. You need to come to the pediatric ICU immediately. Bernard was in his truck before the call ended. County General was 23 minutes away. He made in 14, his training kicking in, calm heart rate, steady hands, mission focus. But inside, where the training didn't reach, something was tearing loose. The pediatric ICU was on the 4th floor. Bernard took the stairs 3 at a time. The nurse at the desk pointed him toward room 412 before he could speak. His face must have said enough. Dr. Orlando Rubio met him outside the room. Young, competent, exhausted. Mr. Houston, Gabriella is stable, but he paused, choosing words carefully. She has 17 stab wounds. Defensive wounds on her hands and arms. We've stopped the bleeding and she's sedated. The next 48 hours are critical. 17. The number hit Bernard like a physical blow. Defensive wounds meant she'd try to protect herself. Meant she'd been conscious, fighting, terrified. Who brought her in? Her stepfather, Donnie Hoover. He's in the waiting room. Bernard's vision tunneled. Did he do this? Dr. Rubio's expression was carefully neutral. He claims he found her. Said she must have been attacked by an intruder. Police are investigating. What do you think? The doctor glanced down the hallway, then back to Bernard. I think I've seen a lot of stab wounds. Kitchen knife, most likely. Frenzied attack. Whoever did this wasn't trying to kill quickly. They were angry. Bernard understood what the doctor wasn't saying. I need to see her. 5 minutes. She won't know you're there. Gabriella looked impossibly small on the hospital bed, tubes running from her arms, monitors beeping steadily. Her face was pale, bruised along the jaw. Her hands were wrapped in bandages. Bernard sat beside her and took her uninjured hand gently. I'm here, baby girl, he whispered. I'm not leaving. I promise. A nurse stepped in. Sir, there's a police officer who needs to speak with you. Bernard squeezed Gabriella's hand once more and stood. In the hallway, a uniformed officer waited, young, nervous. Behind him stood Police Chief Gary Hoover. Gary was a bigger man than his brother, barrel-chested and gray-haired, with a face that had learned to project authority. He wore his dress uniform, badge gleaming. Bernard. Gary's voice was measured, sympathetic. Terrible thing. We're doing everything we can to find who did this. Where's Donnie? Waiting room. He's devastated. Found Gabby in her room. Called 911 immediately. I want to see him. Not a good idea right now. He's giving his statement. You need to let us handle this. Bernard looked at Gary. Really looked at him. The man's eyes were cold, calculating. This was a performance. Your brother did this. Gary's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation. You got any proof? Because Donnie's got defensive wounds too. Looks like he fought off whoever attacked Gabby. Defensive wounds. On his hands. from punching the intruder. Bernard felt the cold settle in. Gary had already constructed the narrative. Donnie was the hero. Some phantom intruder was the villain. And if Bernard pushed, he'd be the unstable ex-military father making wild accusations against his daughter's savior. "I'm going to the waiting room," Bernard said quietly. "Bernard." Gary's hand landed on his shoulder. Heavy, proprietary. "Don't do something stupid. You got a daughter who needs you. She needs you thinking clearly, not ending up in a cell." Bernard looked at the hand on his shoulder, then at Gary's face. "Take your hand off me. Now." Something flickered in Gary's eyes, recognition, maybe, of what he was dealing with. He removed his hand. Bernard walked to the waiting room. Donnie sat in a plastic chair, his right hand wrapped in a bandage, his left holding a coffee cup. When he saw Bernard, he stood. "Bernard, man, I'm so sorry. I tried to." Bernard saw it then. The smirk. Brief, barely there, but unmistakable. Donnie Hoover was enjoying this. "The little bastard cried too much," Donnie said, his voice low enough that only Bernard could hear. "Should have died." Bernard stopped. The waiting room had 4 other people, 2 nurses, an elderly couple. The hallway behind him had officers. This was the test. Gary wanted to see if Bernard would snap, give them a reason to lock him up. Bernard looked at Donnie, really looked at him, memorized the face, the stance, the position of his hands. Calculated reach, response time, optimal strike points. 7 seconds. He could destroy this man in 7 seconds. Break both legs at the knee, crush the windpipe, leave him drowning in his own blood on the hospital floor. But Gabriella needed him free. "Meet me on the ground floor," Bernard said quietly. "Now." Donnie's smirk widened. "That a threat? Gary, your boy here, threatening me." Gary appeared in the doorway. "Bernard, I warned you." "I'm going to get coffee," Bernard said. "If Donnie wants to join me, that's his business. Freedom of movement, last I checked." He turned and walked to the elevator. Pressed the button for ground floor. Part of him didn't expect Donnie to follow. But as the doors started to close, a hand shot through. Donnie stepped in alone. The doors closed. "You think you scare me?" Donnie said. "Navy SEAL tough guy. Gary owns this town. You touch me, you're done." Bernard watched the floor numbers descend. 3, 2. "I taught close quarters combat for 16 years, Bernard said conversationally. "Know what the most important lesson is." "What?" "Efficiency." The elevator dinged. Ground floor. The doors opened onto a mostly empty corridor, just maintenance access and storage. Bernard had studied the hospital layout weeks ago, when he'd first started planning. He stepped out. Donnie followed, still smirking. Bernard turned and struck. 347 milliseconds. That's how long it took. First strike, palm heel to the solar plexus, driving the air from Donnie's lungs. Second, grab the right wrist, twist, feel the bone snap. Third, sweep the legs while Donnie's off balance. Fourth, as Donnie fell, drive his knee into the man's right leg, just above the kneecap, shattering it. Fifth, roll Donnie over, ignoring the screaming, and repeat the knee strike on the left leg. 7 movements. Brutal efficiency. Donnie lay on the floor, gasping, both legs bent at impossible angles. Bernard crouched beside him. "I could have done worse," Bernard said quietly. "I could have made it so you never walked, never fed yourself, never breathed without a machine. But my daughter needs me free. So I gave you what you deserve and what I can live with. When Gary asks, you tell him you fell down the stairs. Because if you say I did this, I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. I've got footage. I've got witnesses. And I've got 16 years of knowing how to make evidence stick." He stood and walked toward the emergency exit. Behind him, Donnie's screams brought security running. Bernard pushed through the exit door and pulled out his phone. Called Timothy Henson. "Tim, I need an alibi for the last 20 minutes. I was with you. Coffee shop on Brennan Street. Multiple witnesses saw us. Done. What happened? Justice. Partial. Meet me at the warehouse in an hour. Bring everything you have on Gary Hoover." Bernard hung up and walked to his truck. His hands were steady. His heart rate was normal. The cold thing in his chest had settled into something patient, purposeful. This wasn't over. Gary would come for him now, legal or not. But Bernard had crossed the line, and there was no going back. All that mattered was protecting Gabriella and making sure both Hoover brothers paid for what they'd done. He drove to the warehouse, parked, and went inside. The wall of evidence stared back at him. He pulled out a red marker and drew a line through Donnie's picture. One down. The police came for Bernard at dawn. 6 officers, 4 squad cars. Gary Hoover directing operations from a black SUV. They didn't knock. They used a battering ram on his front door. Bernard had been awake, drinking coffee, waiting. He set the cup down carefully as they swarmed in, weapons drawn. Bernard Houston, you're under arrest for assault with intent to commit murder. They threw him against the wall, cuffed him roughly. Gary walked in last, taking his time, savoring the moment. Read him his rights. Process him. And make sure he understands, no bail. He's a flight risk and a danger to the community. Bernard said nothing as they marched him out. The neighbors watched from their windows. News vans were already pulling up. Gary had tipped them off. This was theater, a message. At the station, they put him in an interrogation room and left him alone for 3 hours. Standard intimidation technique. Bernard had been waterboarded by CIA trainers. This was background noise. When Gary finally entered, he brought coffee, set it in front of Bernard. You really screwed up, Bernard. How's Donnie? Surgery on both legs. Doctors say he might walk again. Might. You destroyed both his knees. That's 15 to 20 years. Unless he fell down some stairs. Gary leaned back, studying Bernard. Donnie says you did it. Says you threatened him, lured him to a secluded hallway, and attacked him. We got him on record. We got your history of harassment. We got witnesses who saw you at the hospital acting aggressive. You've got a brother who stabbed my daughter 17 times and tried to play hero. You've got no proof of that. The investigation's ongoing. Could have been anyone. Intruder, as Donnie said. Bernard smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Dr. Rubio's report says the wounds are consistent with domestic violence. The angle, the frenzy, the location. Kitchen knife from Debbie's own set. I'm guessing forensics will match it once they actually look. Forensics is being very thorough. Might take weeks, months even, long enough to bury the evidence. Gary stood. Here's how this plays out. You plead guilty to assault. You serve 10 years, maybe 12. In exchange, I make sure Gabriella's taken care of. Debbie gets full custody, no visitation for you. Gabriella grows up safe. Safe. With a man who stabbed her 17 times. Donnie will be properly supervised. I'll make sure of it. You'll make sure he doesn't get caught again. Gary's smile was thin. You think you're the first person who tried to go after my family? I've been doing this for 23 years. I own the DA, the judges, half the city council. You're one man, Bernard. An unstable veteran with a history of violence. Who do you think people will believe? Bernard looked at his cuffed hands. When does Gabriella wake up? Doctor says another day or 2. Why? Because when she does, she'll talk. She'll say who hurt her. And even you can't silence an 8-year-old girl. Something dark crossed Gary's face. Kids get confused after trauma. Memories get fuzzy. The doctors will back that up. You're threatening to manipulate my daughter's testimony. I'm saying that trauma does strange things to memory. Medical fact. Bernard leaned forward as far as the cuffs allowed. Then I guess we're in an impasse. Because I'm not pleading guilty, I'm not staying quiet, and I'm not letting you bury this. Then you'll rot in here until trial. And I'll make sure that trial takes years. Gary left. Bernard sat alone in the interrogation room for another 6 hours before they finally processed him into holding. No bail as promised. His court-appointed attorney was a tired public defender named Brett Rollins who explained in detail how thoroughly screwed Bernard was. Gary Hoover's got 4 officers willing to testify they saw you threaten Donnie. Security footage from the hospital shows you following him to the ground floor. Donnie's injuries are consistent with his statement. You've got no alibi. I was having coffee with Timothy Henson on Brennan Street. Brett checked his notes. Mr. Henson's statement is convenient, especially since he's a known associate of yours from military service. DA won't buy it. Bernard had expected this. What about Gabriella's case? Separate investigation. Gary's department is handling it. Gary's brother is the suspect. On your word, which, given current circumstances, doesn't carry much weight. Bernard realized this was the trap. Gary had isolated him completely. As long as Bernard was in jail, he couldn't protect Gabriella, couldn't gather evidence, couldn't fight back. And if he somehow made bail, Gary would ensure the legal process dragged on until Donnie's trail went cold. I need to make a phone call. They gave him 5 minutes. He called Judith Montgomery. Bernard, what the hell did you do? He told her everything. The confrontation, the assault, the threat against Gabriella's testimony. Judith was quiet for a long moment. I can't represent you on the assault charge. Conflict of interest with the custody case. But I can tell you this. You just validated every argument Gary's going to make about your instability. Judge Humphrey will use this to permanently terminate your parental rights. So, I should have let Donnie walk free? You should have trusted the system. The system is Gary Hoover. Judith's voice softened. I know. God help me, I know. But now you're in his cage, and he's going to make you disappear. I'll do what I can, but Bernard, you need to prepare for the worst. The worst. Bernard hung up and sat on a concrete bench in his cell. Around him, the holding facility hummed with activity. Drunks, thieves, addicts. Men waiting for trials that might never come, drowning in a system designed to break them. Bernard closed his eyes and thought about Gabriella. Small hands wrapped in bandages. Monitors beeping. 17 stab wounds. He taught combat for 16 years. He knew 100 ways to kill a man, 50 ways to extract information, 30 ways to disappear. But he'd never learned how to fight corruption from inside a jail cell. Unless. Bernard opened his eyes, looked around the holding cell. 12 men, various charges. He recognized one, Ramiro Monroe, small-time dealer who'd been arrested 17 times. Another, Vince Mitchell, enforcer for a local gang. Both had done time. Both knew how the system really worked. Bernard stood and walked over to Ramiro. You know Gary Hoover? Ramiro laughed. Man, everyone knows Gary. He's the reason half of us are in here. Cops in this town got quotas, and Gary makes sure they fill him. Tell me about his operation. Why? You planning a revolution from inside county lockup? Something like that. Ramiro studied Bernard, then glanced at Vince. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Gary runs this city like his personal kingdom, Ramiro said quietly. Got cops on payroll, judges in his pocket, DA who won't touch his people. He protects his own, crushes anyone who threatens them. You really messed up his brother? I did. Vince smiled. Respect. Donnie's a piece of garbage. Used to beat on his first wife. Gary made those charges disappear. Heard he was with your kid. Bernard's jaw tightened. He stabbed my daughter. 17 times. The cell went quiet. Even the drunks stopped muttering. Kids are off limits, Vince said, his voice hard. Gary protecting him with everything he's got. Ramiro and Vince exchanged another look. Then Ramiro leaned in close. There's people in this city who hate Gary. People he screwed over, locked up on bogus charges, destroyed. They've been waiting for someone to stand up to him. Someone with nothing left to lose. I need information, Bernard said. Everything Gary's buried. Every dirty deal, every covered-up crime, every person he's wronged. I need evidence that'll bring him down. Evidence don't matter if Gary controls who sees it. Then I need to make sure someone outside his control sees it. Media, FBI, someone. Vince nodded slowly. There's a reporter. Christy Camacho at the Herald. She's been trying to nail Gary for years. Couldn't get sources to talk. Everyone's too scared. But you? Ex-Navy SEAL, daughter in the hospital. Locked up for defending her? That's a story. I need to reach her. I got a burner number memorized. My girl on the outside can set it up. But it'll cost you. What do you want? When you take Gary down, you remember who helped. Put in a word with whoever comes after. Get some of these bogus charges looked at. Bernard extended his hand. Deal. They shook. For the first time since the hospital, Bernard felt the cold thing in his chest shift. This wasn't over. Gary thought he'd caged a broken man. He'd caged someone with nothing left to lose and 16 years of experience, making the impossible happen. The real war was just beginning. 3 days later, Bernard sat across from Christy Camacho in the prison visitation room. She was mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with a recorder on the table between them and a notepad covered in shorthand. I need you to understand what you're asking, Christie said. Gary Hoover has sued the Herald twice. Both times, our sources mysteriously recanted. Our evidence disappeared. We lost both cases and nearly went bankrupt. My editor won't run anything on Gary without bulletproof verification. I can give you that. Bernard slid a piece of paper across the table. An address. Warehouse on the industrial side. Unit 247. Inside, you'll find 4 years of research. Photos, documents, recordings. Everything Gary's buried. Christie stared at the address. How'd you? I had help. People Gary screwed over who've been waiting for someone to fight back. That warehouse has evidence of 17 separate cases where Gary manipulated investigations, destroyed evidence, or intimidated witnesses. It has financial records showing payoffs to judges and city officials. It has testimony from officers who quit rather than participate in his corruption. Why didn't you go to the FBI? Because Gary has contacts there too. But the media? Once the story breaks, once it's public, he can't bury it. That's why I need you. Christie was quiet for a long moment, studying Bernard's face. Your daughter. How is she? Awake. Scared. Gary's got officers stationed outside her room, controlling who sees her. My ex-wife won't let me visit. Gabriella's asking for me. What did she say about the attack? Donnie did it. She told the doctors, told the nurses, told everyone who'd listen. Gary's calling it trauma-induced confusion. He's got a psychiatrist ready to testify that her memories are unreliable. Christie's expression hardened. That's evil. That's Gary. And it's going to keep happening until someone stops him. She picked up the address, folded it carefully. If I do this, if I run this story, Gary will come after me. He'll sue, threaten, maybe worse. He will, but you'll have protection. I made sure of it. Ow! Bernard leaned forward. Because the same day your story runs, copies of everything in that warehouse go to the FBI field office in the state capitol, the state attorney general, and the DOJ. Gary can threaten you, but he can't threaten all of them. And once the investigation starts, once federal eyes are on him, he's done. Christie smiled. You've been planning this. Since the moment they arrested me. Gary thinks I'm helpless in here. He thinks he's won. But I spent 16 years planning operations in hostile territory. This is just another mission. What about your daughter? The custody case. Judge Humphrey is on Gary's payroll. I've got evidence of that too, in the warehouse. Once that comes out, every case he's presided over gets reviewed, including my divorce. Gabriella comes home. And Donnie? Bernard's expression went cold. Once Gary's protection disappears, Donnie gets charged with attempted murder. He goes away for life. But that's not enough. What do you mean? I mean, Gary and Donnie don't just get to go to prison. They need to lose everything first. Their power, their reputation, their allies. They need to feel what it's like to be helpless, to watch everything crumble, to know they brought it on themselves. Christie studied him carefully. You're not just after justice. You're after revenge. I'm after both. And I'm going to get them. She stood, gathering her recorder. I'll go to the warehouse. If what you say is there, we'll run the story. Front page, above the fold, everything. How long? 3 days to verify everything, 2 to write it. 5 days total. Make it 3. Gary's moving to get my parental rights terminated. Hearings in 4 days. I need the story out before then. Christie hesitated, then nodded. 3 days. But Bernard, if this goes sideways, if Gary buries this story too, you're done. They'll use your cooperation with me as evidence of your instability. Then don't let it go sideways. After she left, Bernard was escorted back to his cell. Ramiro was waiting, grinning. Your reporter friend looked motivated. She is. Now we need phase 2. Already in motion. Vince's people are spreading word on the street. Every dealer, every corner boy, every person Gary's crew has shaken down. They're getting ready to talk once the story breaks. Safety in numbers. Bernard nodded. And the inside? Johnny Winters, he's a guard here. Good guy, hates Gary. He's been documenting every time Gary's had people beaten and holding, evidence tampered with, witnesses intimidated. He's ready to testify. The pieces were moving. Bernard had spent 16 years learning strategy. How to identify weak points, how to coordinate multiple forces, how to turn an enemy's strength into weakness. Gary's power came from fear and control. Bernard was about to show him what happened when people stopped being afraid. His court-appointed attorney, Brett Rollins, visited that afternoon. "I've got bad news." The DA offered a plea. 25 years. You serve 18 with good behavior. It's the best you're going to get. I'm not taking it. Bernard, we go to trial. You're looking at life. Gary's got 6 officers ready to testify. The security footage shows you following Donnie. Your military record works against you. They'll paint you as a trained killer who snapped. Let them try. I'm going to trial. Brett rubbed his face. There's something else. Judge Humphrey moved up the custody hearing. It's tomorrow. Tomorrow? That's not legal. It is if he deems it an emergency. And with you in jail for assault, he's arguing Gabriella needs permanent placement immediately. Your ex-wife's attorney is pushing for complete termination of your rights. Bernard felt his control slip. This was Gary's endgame. Lock Bernard up, strip his parental rights, isolate Gabriella, and make sure no one ever heard the truth. I need to be at that hearing. They'll transport you in full restraints. You look like a criminal in front of the judge. It'll hurt your case. I don't care. Gabriella needs to see me. Brett sighed. I'll arrange it. But Bernard, this isn't looking good. Humphrey's going to rule against you, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. After Brett left, Bernard sat in his cell and thought about Gabriella. 8 years old, scared, hurt, probably thinking her father had abandoned her. The thought was unbearable. His cellmate, a man named Francis Hendricks, serving 6 months for parole violation, spoke up. You really fight for your kid like this? Every father should. Most don't. Most of us in here, we got kids on the outside we ain't seen in years. System makes it easier to give up than fight. Francis paused. I had a daughter once. Ex took her, moved 3 states over. I missed enough support payments. They terminated my rights. Never saw her again. Bernard looked at him. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Fight. Whatever it takes, you fight. Because these people, Gary, that judges the whole machine, they count on you giving up. They count on you being too tired, too broken to keep going. You prove them wrong. Bernard extended his hand. Francis shook it. I will. That night, Bernard couldn't sleep. He lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, and thought about the hearing tomorrow. Thought about Christie at the warehouse, verifying evidence. Thought about all the people he'd recruited, all the pieces in motion. 16 years of training had taught him one crucial lesson. The most dangerous moment in any operation is right before contact, when the enemy doesn't know you're coming, but you haven't yet struck. Tomorrow, Gary would think he'd won, would think Bernard was defeated. Tomorrow, Bernard would show him the war had just begun. The courtroom was small, designed for family law proceedings. Bernard sat in his orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed to a chain around his waist, ankles shackled. 2 guards flanked him. Across the aisle, Debbie sat with her attorney. She wouldn't look at Bernard. Judge Matthew Humphrey presided, a thin man in his 60s with gray hair and cold eyes. Bernard had researched him extensively. 15 years on the bench, appointed by a governor Gary had supported. 7 cases involving police misconduct, all ruled in favor of the department. Gary sat in the back row, watching. This is an emergency hearing regarding the custody of minor child Gabriella Houston. Judge Humphrey began. Given recent events, specifically Mr. Houston's arrest for felonious assault, the court must determine immediate placement. Debbie's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client requests immediate and permanent termination of Mr. Houston's parental rights. His violent attack on her husband demonstrates clear danger to the child. Furthermore, Mr. Houston has a documented history of harassment and surveillance that created an unsafe environment. Judge Humphrey nodded. Mr. Rollins, does your client wish to respond? Brett stood, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence of all charges. He acted to protect his daughter after she was grievously injured by an unknown assailant. Debbie's attorney interrupted. There's been no determination of who attacked Gabriella. My client's husband, Donnie Hoover, heroically attempted to save her and was subsequently attacked by Mr. Houston in an unprovoked assault. Bernard watched the performance. This was scripted, rehearsed. Humphrey would rule against him no matter what Brett said. Your Honor, Brett tried again. Gabriella herself has stated. The child statements are under review by psychiatric professionals, Judge Humphrey said. Dr. Kenny Chase has evaluated her and determined her memories of the incident are unreliable due to trauma. We cannot base custody decisions on confused testimony. Bernard's jaw clenched. Dr. Chase was another name from the warehouse, Gary's personal psychiatrist who testified in dozens of cases, always supporting Gary's narrative. I'd like to speak, Bernard said. Judge Humphrey frowned. Mr. Houston, you're represented by counsel. I know my rights. I'm allowed to address the court. Humphrey looked irritated but nodded. Briefly, Bernard stood as much as his shackles allowed. Your Honor, my daughter was stabbed 17 times by Donnie Hoover. She survived because she fought back. She told the doctors, the nurses, and anyone who'd listen what happened. The only reason we're pretending there's any doubt is because Donnie's brother is Police Chief Gary Hoover, who's sitting in the back of this courtroom making sure justice doesn't happen. Mr. Houston, I defended my daughter because the system failed her. Because the police Gary controls won't investigate his own brother. Because judges like you are too deep in Gary's pocket to care about truth. So yes, I hurt Donnie. I do again. But I'm not a danger to my daughter. I'm the only person trying to protect her. The courtroom was silent. Judge Humphrey's face reddened. Mr. Houston, these accusations are serious and completely unfounded. You're demonstrating exactly the kind of paranoid, violent thinking that makes you unfit for custody. I'm ruling. The courtroom doors opened. Christy Camacho walked in, accompanied by 3 people Bernard recognized from the warehouse photos, former officers who'd quit Gary's department. Behind them, a man in a dark suit, FBI. Judge Humphrey paused. This is a closed hearing. Actually, Your Honor, it's not. The FBI agent stepped forward, showing his badge. Special Agent Nate Mercer, FBI Public Corruption Task Force. We have several questions about this proceeding. Gary stood up in the back. What the hell is this? This is a federal investigation into corruption in the county police department and judiciary. Agent Mercer looked at Judge Humphrey. Your Honor, are you aware that your financial records show 17 payments totaling $400,000 from a shell company owned by Police Chief Gary Hoover? The courtroom exploded. Debbie's attorney started objecting. Gary moved toward the door. Judge Humphrey's face went white. This hearing is adjourned. Humphrey banged his gavel. Actually, it's not. Christy spoke up, her voice cutting through the chaos. Because as of this morning, the Herald published evidence of systemic corruption involving Chief Hoover and multiple city officials, including you, Judge Humphrey. The story includes financial records, testimony from 17 officers, and documentation of manipulated investigations. It's front page, and it's gone viral. Gary lunged toward Christy. Agent Mercer stepped between them. Chief Hoover, don't make this worse. We have warrants for your arrest, Judge Humphrey's arrest, and several officers in your department. The state attorney general has appointed a special prosecutor. This is over. Bernard watched Gary's face cycle through rage, disbelief, and finally fear. For 23 years, the man had controlled everything. Now, in the span of 5 minutes, it had all collapsed. My brother, Gary started, is being arrested as we speak. Attempted murder of child. The evidence is overwhelming once our forensics team actually looked at it. Agent Mercer turned to Bernard. Mr. Houston, you're being released immediately. All charges dropped. The special prosecutor wants to talk to you about testifying against Hoover. The guards unlocked Bernard's shackles. He stood, rubbing his wrists, and looked at Gary. You should have just let the system work, Bernard said quietly. But you corrupted it. You made yourself the system. So I had to become something else. Gary's voice was hoarse. My brother didn't mean. Your brother stabbed my daughter 17 times and smiled about it. You protected him. You tried to bury the truth. Now you both pay. Agent Mercer escorted Gary out in handcuffs. Judge Humphrey was next. Debbie sat frozen, her attorney frantically making phone calls. Christy approached Bernard. How does it feel? Incomplete. Where's Donnie? County Hospital. still recovering from the broken legs. But he's in custody now. They're moving him to the state prison medical facility. Bernard nodded. I need to see Gabriella. She's still at County General. Dr. Rubio says she's recovering well. Keeps asking for you. Bernard left the courtroom with Christy beside him. Outside, news cameras had gathered. The story was everywhere. Bernard ignored them, walking to his truck, which Brett had arranged to have brought over. What are you going to do now? Christy asked. I'm going to my daughter. Then I'm going to make sure Gary and Donnie never hurt anyone again. The FBI's got them. The system will handle it. Bernard looked at her. The system failed. I fixed it, but I'm not done yet. Bernard, I appreciate what you did. You helped bring the truth to light. But Gary still has allies, lawyers, money. He'll try to weasel out of this. And even if he doesn't, even if he goes to prison, that's not enough. What more do you want? Bernard climbed into his truck. I want him to feel what I felt. Powerless. Broken. Watching his world destroyed. And I'm going to make sure he does. He drove to County General, his mind already working through the next phase. Gary's arrest was just the beginning. The real revenge, the complete, total destruction of everything Gary Hoover had built, that was still to come. And Bernard had 16 years of experience making impossible things happen. At the hospital, he found Gabriella's room. She was sitting up, watching cartoons, her small face brightening when she saw him. Daddy! Bernard crossed the room and hugged her carefully, mindful of her injuries. She clung to him, crying softly. I'm here, baby. I'm not leaving again. I promise. That man, Donnie, he hurt me. He was so angry. I know, but he's never going to hurt you again. Never. Dr. Rubio appeared in the doorway. Mr. Houston, she's doing remarkably well. The surgeries were successful. With physical therapy, she should make a full recovery. How long before she can come home? Another week, maybe 2. We want to monitor the healing. Bernard nodded, still holding Gabriella. I'll be here every day. That evening, as Gabriella slept, Bernard sat in the chair beside her bed and opened his laptop. Timothy Henson had dropped it off earlier with everything from the warehouse backed up. Bernard pulled up the files on Gary's assets. The man had been collecting dirty money for over 2 decades. Real estate, investments, offshore accounts. All of it traceable, all of it documented. Bernard made a call to Judith Montgomery. Bernard, I saw the news. Congratulations on getting out. I need your help with something. Civil forfeiture. Every asset Gary Hoover owns, I want it seized and liquidated. The proceeds go to his victims. That's ambitious. But with the FBI investigation, we might be able to argue the assets were proceeds of corruption. Not might. Will. I've got documentation of every illegal payment, every bribe, every extortion. It's all in the files I'm sending you. This could take years. Then we start now. I want Gary to watch his empire crumble. I want him to lose his houses, his cars, his investments. Everything. Judith was quiet for a moment. You're not just after justice anymore, are you? I'm after both. Justice is the legal process. Revenge is making sure he suffers through every second of it. I'll start the filings tomorrow. Bernard hung up and returned to watching Gabriella sleep. Outside, the news was still breaking. Gary's arrest, Humphrey's resignation, the expanding FBI investigation. 17 officers had already been suspended. The DA was under investigation. The entire county's law enforcement structure was imploding. Bernard had done that. One man with nothing but determination and 16 years of training in how to fight impossible battles. But he wasn't finished. Gary and Donnie were in custody, but they had lawyers, connections, money. The trial would take months, maybe years. Appeals could drag on longer. And there was always the chance, however small, that they'd find a way out. Bernard couldn't allow that. He opened another file on his laptop, profiles of Gary's remaining allies. The officers who hadn't yet been arrested. The politicians still in Gary's pocket. The lawyers who'd made careers defending Gary's people. One by one, Bernard began planning their exposure, their downfall. Because revenge, real revenge, wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about destroying their ability to ever harm anyone again. And Bernard had all the time in the world to make that happen. 6 weeks later, Bernard stood in his living room, boxes stacked everywhere. Gabriella was home, healing well, starting to smile again. Debbie had signed over full custody without contest. Facing her own legal troubles for enabling Donnie, she'd taken a plea and was now in counseling. The doorbell rang. Bernard answered to find Agent Mercer. "Mr. Houston, got a minute?" They sat at the kitchen table. Mercer looked tired. "The investigation keeps expanding. We've uncovered corruption going back 15 years. Dozens of officers, 3 judges, the DA, half the city council. It's the biggest public corruption case the state's seen." "Good." Gary's attorney is pushing for a plea. 15 years, he serves 10. Bernard's expression darkened. "No deal. It's not your call." "It is. I'm the victim here. My daughter is. We have a say, and I say no deal." Gary goes to trial for everything. Every corrupt act, every covered-up crime, everything. Mercer sighed. Trial could take 2 years. It'll be brutal for Gabriella. She'll have to testify. She's stronger than you think. And she deserves to see the men who hurt her held accountable. What about Donnie? What about him? He's paralyzed from the waist down. The injuries you gave him, his legs never healed right. He'll spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Bernard felt no sympathy. He's lucky to be alive. His attorney is arguing diminished capacity. Says the wheelchair is punishment enough. His attorney can argue whatever he wants. Donnie stabbed my daughter 17 times. He goes away for life, wheelchair or not. Mercer studied Bernard carefully. "You know, there's a line between justice and vengeance. I'm not sure which side you're on anymore. I'm on my daughter's side. That's the only side that matters." After Mercer left, Bernard received a call from Kirk Austin. "You see the news? Gary tried to hang himself in his cell last night." Bernard felt his chest tighten. "Is he dead?" "No. Guards found him in time. He's on suicide watch now." "But Bernard, the man's broken. You won." "Not yet. Not until the trial's over and he's serving life." "Life? For corruption?" "He'll get 10, 15 max. Not for corruption. For conspiracy to commit attempted murder. For witness intimidation. For obstruction of justice. The special prosecutor's building a case that'll put Gary away for 30 years minimum." Kirk whistled. "You really don't do half measures, do you? Would you? If it was your kid?" "No, I guess I wouldn't." That night, Bernard made dinner for Gabriella, her favorite spaghetti and meatballs. She ate slowly, still getting used to using her healing hands. Halfway through, she looked up at him. "Daddy, when's the trial?" "Not for a while, baby. But when it happens, you might have to talk about what Donnie did." "I remember everything. He was yelling. Mom was crying, but she didn't stop him. He grabbed the knife, and she stopped, her eyes welling up." Bernard moved around the table and held her. "You don't have to talk about it now." "I want to. At the trial. I want to tell everyone what he did. You're very brave. I learned it from you." Bernard felt something crack in his chest. Not the cold thing, but something warmer, more painful. "I'm sorry I couldn't stop it. I should have protected you. You did protect me. You hurt the bad man. The police said you did something wrong, but I don't think so. I think you were right." Bernard kissed the top of her head. "Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. Will you get in trouble?" "No, not anymore. The people who wanted to punish me, they were the bad ones. They're gone now." Gabriella hugged him tighter. "Good." Later, after she was asleep, Bernard returned to his laptop. The warehouse files were still there, but he'd moved everything important to encrypted cloud storage. Insurance, in case Gary's remaining allies tried something. He pulled up the latest information from Timothy Henson. Gary's assets were being systematically seized. The mansion he'd lived in, gone, sold at auction. The vacation property, gone. The investment accounts, frozen and transferred to a victim compensation fund. Gary was being reduced to nothing, one piece at a time. Donnie's situation was even worse. Paralyzed, facing life in prison, abandoned by what few friends he'd had. His first wife had come forward with her own testimony about abuse. His construction company had folded. He had nothing. Bernard should have felt satisfied. But the cold thing in his chest hadn't thawed. Because Gary and Donnie were still alive. Still breathing. Still capable of thinking, plotting, maybe finding some way to escape justice. Bernard's phone buzzed. Text from Ramiro. Heard Gary's on suicide watch. Word in lockup is he's not going to make it to trial. Too many enemies. Bernard stared at the message. Part of him, the part that had spent 16 years learning to kill efficiently, wanted Gary to suffer in lockup. Wanted him to experience the fear, the helplessness, the knowledge that death was coming and there was nothing he could do. But another part, the part that was Gabriella's father, knew that wasn't enough. Gary needed to face trial. Needed to hear Gabriella testify. Needed to sit in a courtroom and watch a jury convict him. Needed to walk into a prison cell knowing he'd lost everything. Not by violence, but by the truth. Bernard typed back, make sure he survives to trial. Whatever it takes. Ramiro, you serious? This guy tried to destroy you. Bernard, and I'm destroying him legally. But he needs to be alive to experience it. Ramiro, you're calm, man. I'll spread the word. Bernard set his phone down and looked at the framed photo of Gabriella on his desk. Her school picture from last year, before Donnie, before the nightmare. She was smiling, missing a front tooth, holding up a drawing she'd made. This was what he was fighting for. Not revenge, not really. Justice. The kind of justice that protected innocent people from monsters like Gary and Donnie. The kind that said powerful men couldn't hide behind badges and corruption. Bernard had spent 16 years fighting enemies in distant countries. Now he was fighting an enemy in his own backyard. And he was winning. But the war wasn't over until the verdict came in. The trial began 8 months later. The courthouse was packed. Media, victims, protesters, spectators. Bernard sat in the front row with Gabriella beside him. She wore a blue dress and held his hand tightly. Gary looked diminished in his prison jumpsuit. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt and hollow. His expensive lawyers surrounded him, but their confidence seemed forced. The prosecution's case was devastating. Agent Mercer testified about the corruption investigation. 17 former officers testified about Gary's orders to falsify evidence, intimidate witnesses, manipulate investigations. Financial experts walked through the money trail. Victims gave tearful testimony about cases Gary had buried. On day 4, Donnie was wheeled into court to testify against his brother. The plea deal: life with possibility of parole in 30 years instead of life without parole. He looked broken, his legs useless, his face haunted. Gary told me he'd protect me, Donnie said quietly. After what happened with Gabriella, he said he'd make sure no one could touch me, that his position was untouchable. What did you tell him? The prosecutor asked. I told him a kid wouldn't shut up, that she kept crying, kept making noise. I just wanted her quiet. I didn't mean to. He trailed off. Bernard felt Gabriella's hand tighten in his. She whispered, he's lying. He meant it. He smiled. I know, baby. The prosecutor continued. Did Chief Hoover know you had stabbed Gabriella before you arrived at the hospital? Yes. I called him. He told me to claim it was an intruder. Told me exactly what to say. Then he showed up and took over the investigation. Objection. Gary's lawyer stood. This testimony is overruled, Judge Ignacio Hansen said. The new judge, appointed by the state after Humphrey's resignation, had been scrupulously fair. Gary's lawyer tried everything: character witnesses, procedural objections, attacking the credibility of former officers. Nothing worked. The evidence was too overwhelming, too detailed, too corroborated. On day 7, Gabriella took the stand. Bernard had prepared her for this, but seeing her in the witness box, small and brave, nearly broke him. The prosecutor approached gently. Gabriella, do you remember the day you were hurt? Yes. Her voice was quiet but steady. Can you tell us what happened? Donnie was drinking. He was mad at me because I spilled juice. He started yelling. Mommy tried to get him to stop, but he pushed her. Then he got a knife from the kitchen. What did he do with the knife? Gabriella looked at Donnie. He hurt me with it. A lot of times. I tried to stop him, but I couldn't. He was too strong. Did he say anything? He said I cried too much, that I should shut up. That, she paused, tears running down her face. That I should die. The courtroom was silent. Several jurors were crying. Did you tell people who hurt you? Yes. I told the doctors and nurses. I told everyone. But the man in the police uniform, she pointed at Gary. He said I was confused. He He said, I didn't know what really happened. But you do know? Yes. Donnie hurt me. And that man helped him lie about it. The defense's cross-examination was brief and brutal. Gary's lawyer tried to suggest Gabriella was coached, confused, influenced by her father. But Gabriella didn't waver. I know what happened. I was there. I remember everything. When the prosecution rested, Gary's defense called character witnesses, colleagues, community members, people who'd known Gary for years. But under cross-examination, each one admitted they'd never seen Gary's private actions, had only known his public persona. The defense rested after 2 days. Closing arguments began. The prosecution summarized the mountain of evidence: corruption, obstruction, conspiracy. Gary Hoover built an empire on fear and power. He protected criminals, destroyed evidence, and intimidated anyone who threatened his control. When his brother committed an unspeakable act against a child, Gary didn't hesitate. He used every tool at his disposal to protect Donnie and punish anyone who sought justice. This is corruption at its worst. This is a man who put his own power above the law, above morality, above the life of an 8-year-old girl. Gary's lawyer argued for mercy. Gary's service to the community, his years protecting people, his dedication to law enforcement. Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, he protected his brother when he shouldn't have. But does that erase 30 years of public service? The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood. On the charge of conspiracy to commit attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the charge of witness intimidation, guilty. 7 more guilty verdicts. Gary's face went white. His lawyers immediately began discussing appeals. Judge Hanson scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Christy Camacho approached Bernard. How do you feel? Asked me after sentencing. The prosecution's recommending 45 years. He'll die in prison. Good. Christy studied him. You got what you wanted. Gary's finished. Donnie's serving life. Your daughter's safe. When does the revenge end? Bernard looked through the courtroom doors at Gary being led away in handcuffs. When I know they can never hurt anyone again. When every person they wronged sees justice. When their names are synonyms for corruption and evil. That's when it ends. And what about you? What happens to Bernard Houston after the revenge is complete? Bernard looked down at Gabriella, who'd fallen asleep against his shoulder during the verdict. I go back to being her father. That's all I ever wanted to be. 2 weeks later, sentencing day arrived. Judge Hanson read through the charges methodically, then looked at Gary. Gary Hoover, you were given extraordinary power, the power to protect and serve your community. Instead, you corrupted that power. You built a system designed to protect yourself and those you favored while crushing anyone who threatened you. You enabled your brother to commit heinous violence against a child and then used your authority to cover it up. This court has seen many criminals, but few as deeply corrupt as you. Gary's lawyer began to object. Judge Hanson cut him off. On the charge of conspiracy to commit attempted murder, I sentence you to 25 years. On the charge of obstruction of justice, 20 years to run consecutively. On each count of witness intimidation, corruption, and abuse of power, he continued through each charge, stacking sentences until they totaled 63 years. You will serve this sentence in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. May God have mercy on your soul. Gary was 61 years old. He died behind bars. As the guards led him away, Gary looked back at Bernard. Their eyes met. In that moment, Bernard saw total defeat. The knowledge that everything Gary had built, everything he'd been, was gone forever. Bernard felt the cold thing in his chest finally, slowly begin to thaw. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Bernard made a brief statement. Justice was served today, not just for my daughter, but for everyone Gary Hoover harmed over 23 years. This is what happens when corruption is exposed. When people refuse to be silent. When the powerful are held accountable. A reporter called out, "What about Donnie Hoover? He's serving life. He'll never hurt another child. That's all that matters. Do you regret attacking him?" Bernard paused. "I regret that it was necessary. But I don't regret protecting my daughter. What's next for you? Bernard looked at Gabriella. I'm going home with my daughter. We're going to heal together and move forward. They walked away from the courthouse, away from the cameras, away from the nightmare that had consumed their lives. But that night, after Gabriella was asleep, Bernard sat in his warehouse and looked at the wall of evidence one last time. Most of the pictures had red lines through them. Gary, Donnie, Judge Humphrey, the corrupt officers. All of them imprisoned, disgraced, destroyed. But a few pictures remained. Gary's lawyers, who'd knowingly defended corruption. The politicians who'd taken his bribes and were still in office. The businessmen who'd profited from Gary's protection. Bernard had promised Christie the revenge would end. But looking at those remaining faces, he realized it hadn't. Not completely. These people had escaped justice. They'd claimed ignorance, destroyed evidence, hidden behind attorneys. But Bernard knew the truth, and he had the evidence to prove it. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Timothy, I need you to look into something for me. Because revenge, real revenge, wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about making sure the corruption was completely eradicated. That no one who'd participated in Gary's system escaped consequences. Bernard had started this fight to protect his daughter. But somewhere along the way, it had become bigger than that. It had become about fixing a broken system, about showing that powerful people couldn't hide behind badges and titles and money. And Bernard wasn't finished until every last trace of Gary's corruption was burned out. 3 months after the trial, Bernard stood in the county courthouse again. This time it was civil court. Judith Montgomery presented the case for asset forfeiture against Gary's estate. Gary Hoover accumulated wealth through illegal means over 23 years. This property, these investments, these assets, all proceeds of corruption. The victims deserve restitution. The judge ruled in their favor. Every asset Gary owned was liquidated. The proceeds, over $6 million, were distributed to victims. Families who'd lost loved ones due to Gary's manipulation. Officers who'd been driven out of the department for refusing to participate. People whose cases have been buried, whose lives have been destroyed. Bernard watched as checks were distributed, watched families cry in relief, watched the pieces of Gary's empire scattered to the wind. Later, Timothy Henson met him at a coffee shop. The last of Gary's political connections are being investigated. The FBI is expanding the probe. Looks like half the city council is going down. Good. Bernard, man, when does this end? You've won. Gary's in prison. His brother's paralyzed and serving life. His empire's destroyed. The corruption's being rooted out. What more do you want? Bernard sipped his coffee, thinking, I want to make sure it can't happen again. That's what I want. How? By building something better. I've been talking to the state attorney general. They want to reform the police oversight process. Want someone with experience to help design new accountability systems. Timothy stared at him. You're going into politics? No, I'm going into prevention. I'm going to make sure the next Gary Hoover gets caught before he destroys lives. That's ambitious. So is taking down Gary. But we did it. Timothy smiled. Yeah, we did. That evening, Bernard picked up Gabriella from her therapy session. Dr. Judy Gordon had been working with her twice a week, helping process the trauma. How'd it go, baby? Good. Dr. Gordon says I'm making progress. I don't have nightmares as much. That's great. Daddy, are the bad men gone now? Yes. They can't hurt you anymore. Good. She paused. What happened to their money? It went to help people they hurt. That's good too. She looked up at him. You fixed everything, didn't you? Bernard thought about that. Fixed? Could you really fix something this broken? Gary and Donnie were imprisoned, but the scars remained. Gabriella would carry them forever. Debbie was still struggling with guilt. The families Gary had destroyed couldn't get their loved ones back. But the system was better. The corruption was gone. People felt safer. I tried, baby. I tried to make things right. You did. You're the best, Daddy. Bernard hugged her, feeling the last of the cold thing in his chest finally dissolve. He'd spent 16 years learning to fight. But the most important fight, the one for his daughter, had taught him something else. That love was stronger than hate. That protecting the innocent mattered more than punishing the guilty. That real victory wasn't about revenge. It was about creating something better from the ashes. 6 months later, Bernard stood at a podium in the state capitol. The governor had invited him to speak about police reform, about accountability, about preventing corruption. 16 years ago, I learned how to fight, Bernard began. But this year I learned why we fight. We fight for those who can't fight for themselves. We fight to make sure power serves justice, not the other way around. We fight because silence enables evil. The audience applauded. Bernard saw familiar faces: Agent Mercer, Christy Camacho, Judith Montgomery, Timothy Henson. People who'd helped him when he was alone. Gary Hoover built his empire on fear. He made people believe he was untouchable. And for 23 years, he was. Until people stopped being afraid. Until victims started speaking up. Until one father decided his daughter's safety mattered more than his own. More applause. Bernard continued. Today, this state is implementing new oversight measures. Independent review boards. Body cameras. Mandatory reporting. Whistleblower protections. These aren't just policies, they're weapons against corruption. And they exist because people refuse to stay silent. After the speech, Bernard drove home. Gabriella was waiting, playing in the backyard. She'd healed remarkably well, physically and emotionally. The scars were there, but she was smiling again, laughing again, being a kid again. Bernard watched her through the window and thought about Gary, locked in a cell somewhere, his empire destroyed, his name synonymous with corruption. Thought about Donnie, paralyzed, serving life, haunted by what he'd done. Justice. Revenge. In the end, they'd merged into something else: accountability. The bad men had paid. The system had been fixed. His daughter was safe. Bernard Houston had won. Not through violence, though violence had started it. Not through corruption, though he'd exploited corruption to expose it. He'd won through truth, through evidence, through the relentless pursuit of justice. And now, watching his daughter play, hearing her laugh, Bernard finally felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The war was over. The monsters were caged. The innocent were protected. Bernard Houston, SEAL Team 6 trainer, had completed his most important mission. And he'd done it not by becoming a monster himself, but by showing monsters there was still justice in the world. Still consequences. Still fathers who would burn down empires to protect their children. Gabriella looked up and saw him watching. She waved, smiling. Bernard waved back and stepped outside to play with his daughter in the sunshine, knowing that the darkness was finally, completely behind them. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.